Okay, so endocrine glands. We've got the basics of the endocrine system, endocrine glands. Where do they come from? What do they do? Where are they? So, we're going to talk about the hypothalamus, which is right at the base of the brain at the bottom. You got the anterior pituitary, anterior more toward the front of the cow, the posterior pituitary just behind that. We'll talk about the parathyroid, the thyroid, those are on the throat of the animal. We have the adrenal glands, which are just anterior of the kidneys, and they are on the dorsal side of the abdominal cavity. So they're right up against the short ribs and the spare ribs and all that stuff. So cortex and medulla do two different things. We have the pancreas in the first curve of the duodenum there, getting the job done in some way, shape, or form. We also have endocrine glands here related to reproduction. We're going to let Professor Marshall take care of those for you. So placenta, ovary, follicle, CL, testis in the male, that's all going to be in a repro class somewhere else. So we're going to focus on this half of the animal. So here's a list that's up on Blackboard. You have the two different ways of expressing the name of the hormone. So you got ACTH on the first row there, corticotropin hormone. We're just calling it ACTH, adrenocortical tropic hormone. We have the names, so two names could be called with those. Source, where's the hormone come from? What is its target, purpose, or function with that? So you have between the source and target, it moves through the blood. So we've got all three criteria related to the hormone list here. Let's zoom in a little bit on this and we'll focus on so first we're going to focus on all the things that come out, or most of the things that come out of the hypothalamus. We're not going to go through them all. Again, this is all in the spreadsheet up on Blackboard. It'd be easier to study with that. So first thing we got corticotropin releasing hormone. So that's released from the hypothalamus, and it's going to cause ACTH release from the anterior pituitary. So the pituitaries, the anterior and posterior, are very intimately linked with the hypothalamus. We'll get to that shortly. GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. That's going to be released from the hypothalamus and is responsible for the release of FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary. GnRH, growth hormone releasing factor. You might say SRH, somatotropin releasing factor or releasing hormone. This is the older term. Some people are using the other upper term. So hypothalamus releases somatotropin, ST, the equivalent of BST from the anterior pituitary. TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone. So it's going to come from the hypothalamus, and it's going to stimulate the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone release from the anterior pituitary. So you're looking at hypothalamus, anterior pituitary for this entire set. So the cascade starts with the hypothalamus, then from the anterior pituitary, we have the secondary response to the hormones listed already. So hypothalamus goes to the anterior pituitary, stimulates the release of glucocorticoids from the adrenal gland to increase blood glucose. So ACTH goes to the anterior pituitary, or corticotropin releasing hormone, ACTH is released, that goes to the adrenal gland and starts glucocorticoids, which are going to boost blood glucose. Another anterior pituitary, we have the follicle stimulating, stimulates follicles in the female and sperm development in the male, so target sex organs. LH, luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary, is going to lead to ovulation in females and increased testosterone in males. So in both cases, we think about LH, FSH for our females more often not, but they still have good promoting effects in males as well. So growth hormone, BST, growth hormone or bovine somatotropin released from the anterior pituitary. It's going to go throughout the body and it's going to promote growth. It's going to promote an anabolic metabolism, the buildup of tissues, so strength, muscle tissue, protein buildup in the body. It also, in our mature cows, it will promote the increased production of milk or the diverting of nutrients. Instead of putting it on our back as body condition, it will be diverted to milk production. TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, comes out of the anterior pituitary, goes to the thyroid, where thyroxine is released, and we increase our basal metabolic rate, generally burning more calories for maintenance and producing more heat. So if you've got a hypothyroid, you're generally cold all the time. Hyperthyroid, you're hot all the time. So thyroid stimulating, we hope, is going to be the right balance there to get your basal metabolic rate going at the right speed. So we have two hormones from the posterior pituitary. So oxytocin is going to lead to smooth muscle contraction, specifically in the udder and the repro tract. ADH, antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin. We've talked about that already in our kidney section. Conserves body water by opening up the collecting duct and let water be resorbed into the body and not flow out the kidney. This is our last page here of hormones. We've got glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex. They're going to be released in response to stress to help heal and increase energy available. So in times of stress, having a little extra energy be a good thing. Helps heal the body. Good things can happen. Mineralocorticoids, we already mentioned aldosterone in the kidney section, but there are a variety of ones that are going to help conserve sodium and potassium in the blood from the kidney. So we're going to try to conserve those, make sure those are balanced the right amount for our blood and our tissues. Epinephrine, norepinephrine released from the adrenal medulla. Your basic hormone is going to kick in, fight or flight. You're going to have that sympathetic response. The sympathetic nervous system will work in conjunction. The nervous system usually does it first, and then triggers the medulla to have the more long-term response of the hormones, which is why we vibrate after a near car accident, things like that. That's a function of the hormone. We have our thyroid hormones, T3, T4, are produced in the thyroid gland. They're going to go out into the body and increase the basal metabolic rate, get things revved up, get things moving. Calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, we've already talked about those in the bone section. So calcitonin puts calcium in the bones. Parathyroid hormone takes the calcium out. Insulin, we mentioned that already in metabolism, comes out of the pancreas and it puts things away, things that might be used for energy, so fats, glucose, amino acids. Also helps promote an anabolic metabolism over time. Glucagon from the pancreas, its sole job is to increase blood glucose. So either releasing more from the liver or not allowing certain tissues to take what they may or may not want. So here's your list. It should be pretty easy to study. If you take those spreadsheets, you do list shuffles and things like that, um, you should be able to practice going back and forth on those. So let's talk a little bit about Ren's dilemma. My mom married a guy named Ren, and long story short, he doesn't have a functioning pituitary, car accident. So his pituitary is shut down. What has happened? So we're focusing on the anterior pituitary. The posterior seems to be working well. So you've got the hypothalamus appears to be working. In this class, we talked about the hormones for the anterior pituitary: ACTH, FSH, LH, BST, and TSH. So we know that this part back here is working okay. We know from here to here, the hormones released to get things out of the anterior pituitary is in good shape. The question becomes, what does Ren lose when he does not have a functioning pituitary? So going back and looking at that list of actions, list of things there, he's going to lose certain things without supplement. He's on cortisol twice a day. He's got all the other supplements moving through. So he's got no ACTH, no SFSH, no LH, no BST, no TSH. So give some thought, and we'll talk about it later. But what is he missing? What is, if he doesn't get hormone replacement, what things will he be missing? And then we'll talk about that probably tomorrow morning. Some way, shape, or form, at least show you how it does. We'll probably do a review session moving forward. So if we're looking at the pituitary gland, you need to talk about how the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus work together. You have pituitary gland is pretty much the start of many hormone cascades, but it's very intimately linked with the nervous system component, which is the hypothalamus, which also has endocrine function as well. Here shows illustrates the connection between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So you have the nervous tissue in the hypothalamus. So here's our neurons here. You've got blood flowing in. You've got a capillary bed that the hypothalamus can feed with these neurons, the neurotransmitters, the stimulating or releasing factor hormones. That blood goes through a portal system here, portal blood vessels, and goes to another secondary capillary bed in the anterior pituitary. So nerves here are going to release all these releasing factors. I think we've talked about, we haven't talked about dopamine, but same net thing. So TRH, CRH, GnRH, growth hormone releasing factor, or somatotropin releasing factor, releasing hormone. So these all go, and then the corresponding releases from the anterior pituitary. So you've got hormone flowing through the portal system, activating another hormone here, and then these hormones are going to leave the anterior pituitary and go around the body and have their effects. So note the numbers here are more or less matching up, the releasing hormone with the actual hormone that gets released. Contrast that with the posterior pituitary, where the neurons in the hypothalamus go all the way down into the posterior pituitary. And oxytocin, vasopressin, ADH are released directly from those axons, those stalks. So you have pretty much a hormone system in the anterior pituitary, and then you've got a nervous system in the posterior pituitary. So these dendrites stimulate the bodies. If the signal kicks on, goes down the axon, oxytocin and or vasopressin, depending on what the needs are, depending on what the signals are, will. So oxytocin and vasopressin synthesized in the hypothalamus. They travel down the nerve tracts. They're released from the posterior pituitary. So we've talked about these effects before. So we won't spend much time on them here. If you need to, pause and read.